Hello, carbon-based listeners and silicon-powered friends. Welcome to Mastering the Machine, the podcast where humans and automation collide in perfect harmony. I'm your host, Frank Lamb, and whether you're flesh and blood or circuits and code, we're here to explore industrial automation together. From factory floors to digital cores, we're exploring how machines are reshaping our world, one algorithm at a time. So plug in, power up, and let's master the machine together. Do you have experience in manufacturing or industrial automation? Have you ever thought about starting your own business? I've been involved with many of these fields for over 30 years now, and today I want to talk about how you might want to get started. I want to start here with some of the general broad categories of businesses involved with industrial automation. And this is kind of in the order that I had in my career. I want to start out here with product sales. And there are different ways to sell products. Some of these didn't exist when I got started, such as online selling. But my first job out of college was actually working for a distributor. And he was a very small distributor. He had a couple of lines of products, including Eagle Signal and Omron and Fuji and a sensor line called Tritronics and some other things. And he was pretty much a one-man show. He had hired young people in college to help him either repair some of the products that he supported or do sales for him. I believe I was maybe the third or fourth person that he'd hired over about 10 years. And he was kind of unique. His name was John Stevenson. He ended up being a mentor of mine, taught me a lot about products, certainly had a lot of catalogs associated with products in his shop. And so when I got out of college, one of the first things I had to do was learn about all the products that he sold. And he sent me to schools for those products and things like that. I really never did learn exactly what he charged for a lot of the products. I think there were probably list prices for Eagle Signal and Omron and things like that, and he probably used that pricing guidance. And a lot of the things that he sold, he bid as far as he was bidding against other distributors. So the way distributors work is they are authorized to sell a certain product by a manufacturer, and then they order from that manufacturer, and usually they keep some stock. And I believe his first line was probably Eagle Signal, which was later bought by Danaher. And at that time, Eagle Signal was also, I don't know if they owned Veeder-Root, but Veeder-Root was another one of their products. And Eagle Signal mostly had things like timers. They had mechanical timers that were motor driven. They had counters. And so a lot of the components that you would use in industrial automation, and some of them were electronic components, but a lot of them were mechanical in nature. So I remember Veeder-Root, for instance, was little mechanical counters. And at that time, this was in the early 90s, people were still using a lot of those mechanical timers and counters in their machinery, especially because electronic components were more susceptible to noise and things like that. They would break easily. They were made out of plastic. And most of the Eagle Signal stuff was metal and kind of heavy duty. So he stocked a lot of this stuff, would keep it on the shelves, and in addition would repair products. So the mechanical timers, for instance, the clutches would go out. They would get dirty. I remember some of those products would come in from like rubber manufacturers and things like that, and a lot of corrosion and rubber dust and just dirt and stuff had gotten inside of the timers. And so he would have people part-time repair these timers. I never got to sit down and work on those at the bench, but some of the other part-time guys that he would hire when my job was to pretty much go out and sell the stuff. So that's a lot of what distributors do. They get these product lines and go out and sell usually in the plant in person. And we used to have trade shows, and about 4 of them a year in Tennessee. And we would put all these products out there, and he had built these kind of cool little demo units out of wood, and he would put all these timers and counters and things in the demo units. And then while I was there, he picked up the Omron line, which was a Japanese manufacturer of PLCs, and Eagle Signal even had a small PLC. They had the Micro 190, and they did have the EPTAC controllers. I didn't work a lot with those. They were kind of going obsolete when I started working for Stevenson Controls. But John did send me to all of the schools for Omron down in Atlanta, and I learned about sensors, and their PLC platforms at the time was the CQM1, the C200H CV series, so learn about how the PLCs worked. And a lot of my method of going in and selling for John was to help people with whatever their projects were, teach them a little bit about programming the products, because programming at the time was pretty new. You didn't have laptops. You didn't have a lot of times software. You had handheld controllers, especially for Omron. They had these little handheld devices that would plug into the front of the controller. And during that time, DOS had come out, and they had some rudimentary programming software, but a lot of people didn't have laptops yet. Distributors in general, that's what they do. They stock all the stuff. They knock on customer doors. Through the trade shows, we would get leads, and then we would go in and talk to the people in the plants that needed certain products, educate that person about, like an engineer or maintenance person, about how the products worked. Interestingly, another type of product sales business is called a manufacturer's rep. And John Stevenson and Stevenson Controls was also a manufacturer's rep. And during that time, one of the things that I had to do is support the distributors that John had for the manufacturer's rep products. So Tritronics, which was a sensor line, and Pepperl and Fuchs, which made also sensors and intrinsically safe barriers, things like that, and Fuji Electric. And Fuji Electric at the time got into PLCs and a lot of other just electronic, like motor starters and things like that. And my job was to support those distributors also. And during that time, one of the distributors mentioned, well, you guys are repping this product, but yet you're distributing Omron and Eagle Signal. If I bring you into one of my customers, what's to guarantee that you're not going to come into that customer and try to sell your direct products? And so he coined the term disreputor, which was a distributor and a rep at the same time. And then I kind of extended that later to some of the distributors who would also be systems integrators. I'd call them disintegrators. You could have combinations of those different things. But in general, that's the way product sales works. You are authorized to have certain lines of products and will go out and directly sell those, or you will have a manufacturer's representative that will help you support some of those products, especially if you don't know how those products work. So they're there to educate both you and the end user. Nowadays, one of the things that's happened is you have online capability. You have the World Wide Web, and a lot of products are now sold online by both distributors, by manufacturers' reps, and even directly from the manufacturers. So that's changed the landscape quite a bit. To become authorized to become a distributor, you're going to pretty much have to guarantee that you can sell a certain amount of that product. So they're going to qualify you as far as your capability. And your best bet, if you wanted to get into this line of work and get into product sales, would be to start with something very small and very basic, because if you're new to it, they're not going to probably trust you without some kind of a track record and saying that you can guarantee selling a certain amount per year. The same thing goes true for manufacturers' reps. So a lot of manufacturers' reps will rep many products, and they need to be experts at those products, and they also need to already have either a distributor customer base or a manufacturer customer base. So your best bet if you wanted to get into these fields would be to start with something very small. And one of the common things nowadays is people from other countries are looking for people to sell their product in the United States. So it's pretty easy to, for instance, rep certain Chinese products or even maybe CNC services or things like that from overseas. So that's a good field to get into. It does require that you buy a certain amount of inventory, especially as a distributor. So they may say, well, you need to have, $20,000 to $50,000 worth of product on the shelf, and then of course you're turning over that product and selling it and shipping it. So shipping is part of it. You're probably going to need a physical facility if you want to get into being a distributor. A lot of manufacturers' reps will actually work out of their house. So you're going to need inventory. You're going to maybe need salespeople, especially as a distributor, because somebody's going to be in there to run the shop, run the warehouse, and maybe field calls. People will call in and order products or field online orders. And then as a manufacturer's rep, there's a lot of individual people that just work out of their house to do that. So that's probably the biggest requirement if you get into product sales, is just inventory, some kind of a physical building if you're in distribution, and salespeople working for you. And then online, there are a lot of platforms. For instance, I'm about to get into Shopify, and Shopify allows you to build an online store and ship things, and they will do a little bit of assistance in helping you both build the store and advertise. And so that's another way to get into it. Of course, eBay is another common way to do it, but they do take a pretty good percentage of whatever you're selling. But these are things you can actually get into kind of part-time. The next general category of business I want to talk about is services. So let's say you're an electrician, and of course you might need a license to get into electrical contracting directly, doing industrial contracting. You'd need a contractor's license and things like that. But industrial electricians, you could even start that just by yourself. You would need all the tools and things that are associated with that. You might need a vehicle. A lot of people put the name of their company on the side of their vehicle and drive around and service different plants. So you'd need to get into those things. You'd probably need a license for that. Something that you can do without a license is you can do panel fabrication. Now, some people get certified to do that. They get a UL panel shop, but a lot of factories don't actually require your panels to be UL certified. They just want to make sure that what you're building for them is meeting all of the NFPA and NEC rules and things. UL certification is usually for bigger plants and building lots of panels at a time. So those are some pretty good services that you can get into, and in the case of panel fab, you don't even need a license for it. The next service I'd like to talk about, a very common one, and I've been in this for a long time, would be systems integration. And system integration involves a lot of different things. It can involve programming, it can involve design, certainly doing CAD drawings, electrical design, mechanical design. You could service existing machinery. You could troubleshoot equipment in factories. You need to know something about that equipment, certainly. And in a lot of cases, in the case of programming, for sure, you would need software for whatever platform you wanted to support. So, for instance, myself, I own Allen Bradley software, I own Siemens software, and I had to pay for those. They do require a license and they require a support contract. There are some other software platforms such as Automation Direct and Code Assist that cost little to nothing. In some cases, like Omron, you can actually get a free copy of CX1 software. I've mentioned this before. You can go to plc4me.com, or you could, even if you join the Automation Academy, I do have a copy of Allen Bradley's basic software, the old stuff that supported the Micro 1000 and 1100, and I do have CodeAssist, and Omron CX1 on the site. So you could download those softwares and get started with that sort of thing. Of course, you need to know where those customers are. And in a lot of cases in the U.S., Allen Bradley kind of dominates everything, so you might need to invest in that software. That probably just to get started is, $4,500 or so, plus you're paying a support contract every year. So not an easy thing to get into. Same thing for design work in CAD. You need to own AutoCAD or ePlan or whatever, and a lot of those you can buy kind of by the year. You can pay a yearly fee for that. Service and troubleshooting, really mostly what you need there is tools, and sometimes customers have the software if you really do need to look into the software to troubleshoot a machine or do service on it. Some companies like medical device manufacturers or pharmaceutical companies, you can't change their software anyway. So just being able to go online and look at it, you could get into something like the service version of Allen Bradley software, which is very inexpensive. So those are all good things to get into for systems integration. Of course, another thing I've been involved with for a long time is training. And once again, if you're going to teach things like Allen Bradley or Siemens, you're going to have not only one copy of the software, but probably multiple copies and multiple laptops. If you want to teach on-site or regional in-person classes, you're going to need laptops for everybody and software for everybody. In the case of recorded or video-based training, you need at least one copy of the software, and you need some kind of software to be able to make videos. So I use Camtasia, for instance, and I've created a number of training videos for that, and I've put them on places like Udemy. Teachable and Thinkific are other platforms that you can put training videos on. So in-person, on-site, or regional, you need all the laptops. In-person, online training, you need the laptops that people would remote desktop into. That would be important. And then if you're doing the recorded videos, of course, those are on demand. You need a place to host those videos. And myself, I use Vimeo. You can put them on YouTube, but then you don't have an easy way to monetize it because everybody has access to it. But with things like Vimeo, you can restrict people from seeing the videos. They have to be on your site to access those videos. So that's a good way to do it also. In person, on site, you need a training facility. You need tables. You need a building. You could rent that kind of thing. A lot of the regional classes that I teach for automation training out of Canada, they will rent a hotel room. And then you'll go in there and you'll teach the classes that way. If you want to get into other fields that are not really software related or electricity related, there are things like millwrights, which install equipment, move equipment, disassemble equipment. There are machine shops. Machine shops can make parts for machine builders or small automated machines. If you don't know how to program those things, you can always find local system integrators or programmers to help you with that. When I got started, I used to subcontract to a company called Morgan Tool and Die, and he didn't have any design capability for electrical. He knew a little bit about wiring his small machines, and he had no software. So I got started building small control panels for him and programming very small machines. It was a great way to kind of learn how to do control systems. So installation and assembly, mechanical work, you would need tools for all of that. And then, of course, industrial machine shops have things like mills and lathes, and that's a pretty big capital expense. You can lease some of that equipment. So that's another way to get into the mechanical side of system integration. Before we dive back into today's episode, let me tell you about the team behind Mastering the Machine. When your manufacturing operation needs to level up its automation game, there's one name you need to know: Automation Consulting, LLC. Whether you're integrating new systems, training your workforce, or need expert consulting on industrial automation challenges, We speak both human and machine language fluently. From PLC programming to process optimization, we help manufacturing companies bridge the gap between what is and what's possible. We also host the ultimate training platform for automation professionals. At the Automation Academy, we've created your complete automation learning ecosystem. Our subscription-based training platform gives you unlimited access to comprehensive video courses on systems integration, PLCs, and HMIs. Download technical documents, software tools, and resources that you can actually use in the field. Plus, get personalized job aptitude assistance to advance your career in industrial automation. But here's the best part. Connect with fellow automation professionals on IO Central, our exclusive social media platform where the automation community shares knowledge, solves problems, and builds the future together. Whether you're a seasoned engineer or just starting your automation journey, everything you need is at www.automationllc.com. That's automationllc.com. Join the subscription platform where automation expertise meets community. Now back to today's episode. Now, something that I just kind of lucked into was building small machines for manufacturers. And you would think that this is something that would be very capital intensive. And in a way it was. I certainly had to have tools to build some of that machinery. However, there are ways to do that without investing in things that a typical machine shop would have, such as subcontracting, getting your parts made by somebody else, etc. So machines and systems are certainly something that you can do. This involves infrastructure. You do have to buy components for the machines, which in my case, I started out doing just like small panels with some sensors on them and a little bit of support material, gauging, a little bit of machine vision, did some material handling as part of that. You always have to put the part in place if it's in line with a system. But small machinery can be built without big metal frames and things like that. You can just use extrusion. So when I started my first business, really in my garage, building control panels and things after being a distributor and manufacturer's rep, selling Allen Bradley and things, I thought I had a pretty good collection of factories that I could go call on and talk to them about projects. And even when I was still working for the distributor, I kind of started doing this on the side, built some small control panels in my garage, and then that kind of graduated to coming up with solutions for certain projects. Early on, one of the systems I did involved taking an analog sensor and putting it on a line and putting a little rotation, kind of like a dial table, to rotate a compressor cover. And I had to locate a little divot in the cover, and they had a hard time doing this in the plant that I was calling on for the distributor. And so I said, well, I have an idea, but I don't really know anybody that would go do this. And they said, well, we'll buy the parts if you'll take a whack at it. So they bought me a little rotating motor table and a sensor. It was a laser sensor in this case that measured distance. And what I did is I aimed the little laser at the side of this compressor housing, and as it rotated, I would take readings, analog readings from the sensor, and when it would hit the little divot that was in there, it would give a big difference in distance. That distance difference I could record in a small PLC, and then wherever that was, I would stop the little table from rotating, and that was where the little divot was. So that was one of my early, kind of like a machine. It really integrated into their line. Now, before that, I had to know something about how that line operated and how to program in the line. At the time, it was RS Logix 500. It was a little slick platform, and so I just integrated it into the existing system. I didn't have to build my own PLC panel as such. I just had to put a few components like a power supply and things in a panel, and then build the little support structure out of parts made by a local machine shop. So that was a good way to get started. Another project I did was to monitor parts coming off of a conveyor. I put just a proximity switch on a wheel, and when the conveyor stopped running, then the proximity switch would detect that a little bolt would not pass in front of the switch anymore, and so I could detect that it was stopped, and they could stop the machine and go clean out a bunch of slugs that were building up in the refuse container underneath the conveyor. So these weren't full machines, but they were an introduction into building larger machines. Now, early on in my career, I mentioned previously, I met a machine builder who really mostly did packaging machinery. His name was Tom Nall, and he knew how to build machines, but he had somebody else subcontracting for the controls. So I started doing the subcontracting instead of the person that he had doing it, which was a employee at the place he used to work. I could do it full time. And before you knew it, I had moved my shop next to his shop and was subcontracting all of his controls. During that time, I learned how to build small machines, learned a lot more about how extrusion worked, also learned pneumatics, which is really important. If you're going to build small machines, you really need to know how valves and cylinders and that sort of thing work. So it was almost like doing an apprenticeship. Even though I was making money off of it doing the control side, I got to see how Tom Nall built these machines and how he built his air handling systems and his pneumatic controls and things like that. So I learned quite a bit at that time. And then together we started using a lot more gauging equipment, a lot more servos. And at this time, technology was changing pretty fast. I started doing this in about 1997, I want to say, and I did that for about 5 years, built all the control systems for his machines, and then started coming up with small machines of my own. Gauging, again, machine vision. We had started doing a lot of vision together for automotive plants, and really at that point had about, 10 to 15 employees, probably 2003 to 2006, and had really built a small machine building company of my own. So it can be done. During that time, I also learned about leasing equipment. For instance, I believe I did a lease to buy on a mill and a lathe and an iron worker and a roll-in bandsaw and things like that. Now, I don't necessarily recommend doing that because effectively what I was doing was borrowing money, which is not the ideal way to start a business. And I did run up some credit cards and things like that starting the business. But capital-intensive businesses like that can be started by leveraging as you get the work, then you lease the equipment and you can pay for it that way. Also, just control systems, right? You can subcontract, as I did to Morgan Tool and Die, which later became Morgan Tool and Automation. Just subcontract the control systems themselves. That's sort of systems integration, but really you could make that a full-time business, just doing controls and panels and things to local machine shops. So subbing is always a good way to go. Also during that time, I subcontracted to a material handling company called Advanced Conveyor Systems. Actually, it was called Advanced Handling Systems, I believe. A guy named Doug Cox, and he would sell conveyor systems into local plants, and he needed controls for them. So I would build panels with motor starters and conveyor controls, that sort of thing in them. Things like for a mattress factory, had handled all their mattresses and built little carts on rails. Now, Doug had some of that stuff he was a distributor for, the conveyors and things like that, and then some of it he went to local machine building companies to have some of those stations built, including Nall Automation Systems. So again, that was the power of networking, just knowing all these people and being associated with that sort of area. So get to know the people in your area that are doing that type of stuff. Now that leads to how do you go and sell all this stuff? Really, networking is pretty much everything. You really need to know people in the industry. Over time, you'll get to know people in your area. And of course, working for a distributor, that was kind of how I got started. Nowadays, you have things like LinkedIn. Back then, we didn't. We had trade shows and just kind of word of mouth. You would deal with your distributors, and then your distributors or vendors would introduce you to other people that were in your industry, and you'd hear about jobs that way. And then, of course, there was, in distributorships and in machine building, there was warm calling where you knew somebody and you had heard a rumor that they were working on a system, or there was even cold calling. Certainly in distributorships, manufacturers, reps, you have to be willing to do that. And at that time, that was on the telephone. That was pretty much the only way that you could get a hold of people. You would sometimes just stop into a plant and you could ask to talk to the maintenance manager or engineering manager, and sometimes you would get a hold of them that way. That's pretty rare anymore. There are kind of gatekeepers and receptionists, and you're generally their protocol is to not let you just go in and talk to somebody and interrupt them. So, maybe somebody will return your phone call, maybe they won't. But again, LinkedIn has gone a long ways towards being able to send people messaging and see if they're interested in whatever you are providing. Online is major. I mean, LinkedIn is sort of online, but you really anymore have to have a website of some kind. You have to have an online presence. It doesn't have to be much more than a page or two explaining what you do, but that's kind of taken the place of line cards. Nowadays, you can just put everything online, give them a business card with your website address on it, and then point to your website. Of course, you can do SEO, search engine optimization. That'll make it easier for people to find you. You can do paid ad placements. I know they have Google ads and things like that. You can pay LinkedIn to place ads for you. I haven't found that particularly effective. I have paid people to do some marketing for me, and I don't know that I've ever made money off of the jobs enough to pay for whatever I paid those people, several $1,000s, $4,000, and they'll create a bunch of ads for you. But those people don't know your business as well as you do. And then, of course, there is the problem that you have to pay for it. So trade publications, same thing. You can put your ads in magazines. Once again, I'm not sure that unless you're a pretty good sized company, you're not necessarily going to make enough off of paying for those ads to fund the ads themselves. So that hasn't worked for me, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work for other people. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about funding of all this fun stuff. And the way I did it is I was very eager to get started in my own business. I was in my 30s. I wasn't making enough money, I didn't feel anyway, working for distributors and manufacturers, reps. I had never made any commission, even though I was in sales for about 4 years. So I decided to just kind of wing it and run up some credit cards and things. That is not really the best way to do it. Ideally, you would want to save up ahead of time. Don't be too impatient, and save up some money and maybe 6 months worth of expenses, and then have some jobs in the pipeline, and then just go out and start doing some of that work on the side to start with. And when you think you can jump out on your own, you've got enough money in the bank to support yourself for a while, that's the ideal way to do it, which would be self-funding. I guess the second best method, if you really had to borrow money, is, talk to all your friends and family. They always say if you're going to get investment money, go there first. Go to friends and family first. I'm not sure that's really that much better than banks or lines of credit. You're still going to have to pay some kind of interest, and it may be worse to not pay your friends and family than it is to pay the bank, right? Banks allow bankruptcy and things, but can you imagine, I think like Dave Ramsey said, having Thanksgiving dinner with family that you owe money to? So that's not ideal either. Then the third method, as I mentioned, are banks, which I did have. It was SunTrust Bank, and I had a line of credit with them. It got to be a pretty large line of credit, but it was backed up by the equity in my house. So you're not getting just bankruptable loans. Everything that you borrow is backed by something, and you are the business when you start out. And then, of course, the fourth method, which is not a good method at all, is credit cards. For one thing, the interest is really high on credit cards. So if you're not paying them back, you are definitely running up interest charges and that sort of thing. So your bank would be a better option than certainly credit cards. So I don't recommend really any of that. I've kind of become a hardcore Dave Ramsey listener, and I believe what he says about don't borrow money to start a business. Unless it's just a dire emergency, you don't have to start a business, right? That's when you're ready, that's when you jump out and do that. Everything has to be paid back, whether you're borrowing from friends and family or banks or credit cards, whatever. It has to be paid back, and it makes it even harder when you haven't made a profit yet. So you kind of need to prove yourself by either doing it on the side, side gigs or side hustles as they call them. But so funding is tough. Ideally, you would just want to do it, self-fund it, save up the money, and then start your business. Now I'd like to just share a few tips, and I've kind of mentioned some of this as we've gone along. First, and you can do this while you work for somebody else, before you even start a side hustle, learn everything you can about your chosen field and business in general, and check out all the business regulations and procedures in your state or your country or whatever your area is. Talk to people who have started businesses or are in your field that are doing business, maybe people that do side hustles. You can meet them at the Chamber of Commerce. You can meet them in industry. You'll get to know them through vendors and things like that. As I mentioned, I guess tip number 3, tip number 2 would be to talk to others in your business. Tip number 3 would be start small with a side business. I did it in my garage, and in retrospect, I could have done it part-time in my garage for another 6 months and would have been much more ready to jump out. I didn't know a lot about business. I really didn't take my own advice about learning everything that I needed to know about business. I had a lot of kind of misconceptions about the way business worked, and I just kind of went down and got my business license, which only cost $20, I think, at the time, from my local county clerk or whoever it was in Knoxville, and got me a business license, and later ended up incorporating, becoming an S Corp, but you don't have to do that to start with. Another way to do it, of course, is to team up with somebody else. I did not have great luck with that. And that's another Dave Ramseyism. He says, the only ship that won't sail is a partnership. So that's a kind of a funny one. Because, you're 50-50, and if you have a disagreement, what happens? If the business dissolves, what happens? That's always a problem too. So ideally, you want to start it on your own and maybe subcontract or team up with some other people, kind of like I did. The only time that I did actually partner with somebody and give them a stake in my business, it really didn't work very well. So I'm kind of a believer in that. Don't forget taxes. That's tip number 4. You have to make estimated tax payments on all of your employees and for yourself. All money flows through you. That's an important thing to remember. Even if you're an S Corp, even if you're an LLC, there is no such thing as retained earnings. So you don't have a way to hide money away or whatever. It's all going to be taxed. Any money that you pay to Social Security for yourself and your employees has to be matched. So at the time, I believe it was 6.25%, and that means that I was paying 12.5% for Social Security, not only for myself, but I would have to withhold the 6.25, actually the 6.25 from other people's income, and also match it with my own 6.25. And I had to make quarterly estimates on those payments. So taxes are really important, and that's where a lot of people get in trouble. They forget to make the estimated payments, and before you know it, they're behind. If you owe sales tax, that's another thing that you need to make estimates and pay ahead of time. You're going to need to make some, as you collect money on taxes, you're going to need to put that in an account, a separate account, all your tax stuff should be in a separate account, and then use that to pay your business taxes. Very, very important. You'll also have some property taxes and other taxes. Lots of taxes. That's the only thing that's certain is death and taxes, right? I've mentioned this before. Tip number 5, just don't borrow money. If you can get away with it at all, you have to pay it back. It just makes things that much harder. And then, as I've mentioned before, networking is everything. So that's the 6th and last tip that I have for everybody today. So yes, lots of businesses that you can start in industrial automation and manufacturing related. If you're already in that field, you probably already know something about whatever your field is, and you can probably leverage that into working for yourself. It's been pretty rewarding for me. Most of the time I've done pretty well with it. Every once in a while I've gotten into trouble, usually related to borrowing money or whatever. My strong point is not marketing, so I have to either pay for marketing or network. Every once in a while I throw some ads out there on LinkedIn. I do make my own ads. Nowadays, you have things like ChatGPT that can help you create ads. So you don't necessarily have to pay somebody else a lot of money. And then another option, of course, is to pay somebody less, go overseas. I had a guy from Pakistan doing some work for me in marketing, and he actually did a really good job at creating ads. So anyway, lots of ways that you can market, lots of ways that you can start businesses in various different fields connected with your fields, with your area of expertise. So yeah, I recommend it highly. It is probably more secure to work for yourself anymore than it is to work for somebody else. So good luck, and hope everybody at least considers working for yourself one day. Thank you. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Mastering the Machine. Whether you're headed back to the production line or entering sleep mode, remember, in the world of automation, we're all learning to speak the same language. Thanks for joining me today, both my human listeners and any AI overlords who might be tuning in. Until next time, keep your sensors sharp, your processes optimized, and your curiosity fully operational. This is Frank Lamb signing off. Stay automated, stay amazing.